Welcome back to another edition of Through the Smoke, a Miami Hurricanes football and recruiting podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Network. David Lake joined as always by Gabby Urrutia. We're here delivering our normal audio style podcast that you can get on those various podcast feeds that you regularly listen to us to. And we're also now gonna I don't know the right word, simulcast this or broadcast this on YouTube as well. So we're slowly going to build out this YouTube thing. And if you guys want to watch us talk about, the various topics we touch on here on the podcast, go subscribe to the Inside the U podcast channel, and we will upload video of these same exact podcasts. Nothing's going to really change in terms of the style or what we talk about. It'll just be a video option for you to watch if you prefer to watch your podcast rather than straight up listen. So, want to highlight that. Also, want to highlight on the front end here a couple of our sponsors, as we always do. Right, we'll start with Canes Connection. That, of course, is Miami's collective. They play a vital, important role in Miami's ability to build a championship roster, right? Talent acquisition is the name of the game in college football. The more talented classes that you can stack on top of each other year after year after year, the higher probability you have of competing for championships. So, Canes Connection, uh, assists Miami, the university, in a big way with their collective, and you can be a part of those efforts. Go to canesconnection.com and sign up today. Pick a membership tier, a monthly membership tier that best suits you and your abilities, and be a part of the program here on that grassroots level. Also, want to highlight one of our key sponsors, Nick Musarino at the Musarino Law Group. Again, if you've been injured in a car accident, he's the guy I would personally go to if I had needs in that regard. Again, that's Nick Musarino. You can call him at 561 960 9870 or visit themusarinolowgroup.com. Again, if you're injured in a car accident or have any other type of needs like that, I would go contact him. That information will be in the show notes here as well. So, Gabby, for this podcast, we kind of took a little break. February's a bit of a downtime in the college football calendar these days. And so I figured it'd be nice to just get up to speed, kind of let our listeners, let our subscribers at Inside the U kind of drive the conversation, whatever they want to talk about in a mailbag style podcast. So, got some good questions. And so let's just dive into it here. We'll start with kind of a newsy question
Yeah.
here on the front end from Connecticut Cane Fan 87, who asks, what is the latest with the rumors of certain staff leaving? Is there legit smoke behind it, or are there rumors being used as leverage? So, maybe for people that are unaware of what the rumors were that are out there, I think it's fair to say that Will Harris, who Miami recently hired as defensive backs coach, one of the defensive backs coach uh, this offseason, hired him from Florida. There was some rumors that emerged soon after his hiring at Miami that he might go be an assistant DB coach in the NFL. So that's one rumor. I think there was some rumors too that, Kevin Beard might not be retained as the wide receivers coach. So that's another rumor out there. Also some rumors of, off-field or quality control uh, assistants moving on to other programs in the next step of their careers. So, spring football a week away as we
Right.
record this. So it's definitely getting to be a time where you need your staff in place. And, what would you say, I guess, as it relates to
Yeah.
these rumors right now, as you best understand it, Gabby?
Yeah, I think again, as we best understand it right now, so we can only talk about what the information that we have at the moment right now. And again, after Will Harris took the Miami job after leaving from Florida, I think pretty quickly all the NFL stuff started to buzz. What we know right now is that Will Harris is at Miami. He's, dishing out scholarships. He's offering kids. He's in the building. There have been some, NFL staff changes that I think have kind of shaken things up. Before Will Harris was at Florida, he was with the Los Angeles Chargers with head coach Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley has now just become the defensive coordinator with the New Orleans Saints. I think another kind of twist in this too is the New Orleans Saints just hired Texas cornerbacks coach or defensive backs coach, secondary coach Terry Joseph over, I think, to be their primary defensive backs coach. So my best understanding of the Will Harris situation is essentially a potential title in the NFL would be assistant defensive backs coach. And because of, again, just the natural college things and buyouts and all that stuff, just because he wouldn't be maybe the primary cornerbacks coach or defensive backs coach, again, to hire these college coaches, you need to pay oftentimes significant buyouts, especially if there are years on the contracts. So I think the big question with Will Harris and the NFL is if someone's going to pay a big potential buyout to take him over to be an assistant defensive backs coach. And I think that factor, I think, kind of points me in the direction of Will Harris staying with Miami and following through with this and coming and basically just being in the position that he's in now at Miami. Just everything that I kind of get on my end, that's kind of the consensus. Of course, these things are fluid. And I think now that there have been some official staff changes and there's starting to be some movement, specifically with the New Orleans Saints, I think, we just kind of have to wait and see and maybe just grind it out a few more days or until that position is settled. Essentially, we need to figure out who the assistant defensive backs coach for the New Orleans Saints is going to be. Will Harris, potentially a candidate for that. It could go somewhere else, but I think the end of the line with the Will Harris stuff will be that essentially that role with the Saints. Again, I still feel pretty good about him following through and being Miami's secondaries coach. So with Kevin Beard, again, I think I think that's kind of maybe more of a wait and see mode, right, David? I think that's
I
kind of
think
where
things
we're
have
at.
been explored.
Yeah,
Can a move actually happen? That's where I don't know, right? But
yeah,
have things been explored? I think it's fair to say yes. I think there's smoke to that, right?
for sure.
Will a change actually happen? Frankly, I don't know. I don't know enough right now to say either way, but I do
Yeah.
think there's some smoke to that one.
Yeah, and I think specifically, I think just with the Syracuse opening, right? I think that's maybe one of the ones that maybe draws the most attention. Is Oregon takes Ross Douglas over from Syracuse to Oregon. I think Syracuse does a really good job in South Florida. There are already some South Florida figures on that Syracuse staff. I think that that's one situation to potentially track specifically with Kevin Beard. Like I think that's the one that's kind of maybe drawn the most buzz. Again, spring football 7 days. I mean, I think less than 7 days away as we're recording this, right? Like they would have already gone
Right.
through their first spring practice. We're probably waiting on press conferences after the first spring practice this time next week. So if things are going to happen, I think we'll know. I mean, I guess you never really know, but hopefully we know sooner rather than later, one way or the other. But I definitely think that, as you alluded to, David, there's smoke to that situation and just kind of see where it all lands, once the dust settles.
Yeah. Stay locked on to InsideView.com for the day to day of, these newsworthy type of events that can happen between now and the start of spring football. All right. The next question comes from kind of a fun question. Cane Bear 0207 asks, what was the most painful commitment story that you wrote but never got to publish because the kid ended up committing elsewhere?
Oh, for me, that's easy. It's Jeremiah Smith, right?
Yeah.
The star receiver at Ohio State. Essentially, I think we can probably chalk him up as maybe the most talented player returning to college football in 2025. I don't know, maybe that's a debatable point, but yeah, certainly Jeremiah Smith. That morning, David, we're sitting at Whole Foods, just our
Yeah.
that's like our signing day kind of headquarters. And, phones are buzzing, things are happening. I was kind of doing some of the CBS Sports 24/7 sports coverage from Chaminade. So I was there covering the event. There was actually a ton of technical difficulties for what would have been my first time actually on camera. But yeah, there was a ton of buzz kind of going into that day and into his and like final announcement that he was gonna flip to Miami. And I think we were fully prepared for that on our end, as far as just having the content prepared and everything that we kind of needed. I think there was a point
Miami
that,
felt like it was
right,
happening.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think they kind of gathered into the green room, right? Or gathered into their signing day headquarters, threw on the TV to try to, hopefully celebrate that as a staff. And really, it came down to Ohio State and Miami, and he just Again, I think really truly a game time decision. And we saw the saga of what happened after that, right? He didn't officially
Right.
sign right away, and that kind of went into the evening hours. I don't think it was like to like 7:30 where
Yeah.
he actually formally signed the paperwork. So there was a lot of back and forth going on there even after he announced. So yeah, Jeremiah Smith,
And
no
Hayes
doubt.
Fawcett too, who does a good job making
Yeah,
graphics for On
absolutely.
Three. He's come out and said, like, look, he even said like a couple days before signing day, Jeremiah told him, "Hey, have a Miami graphic just in case, ready."
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So, it's kind of come out now that Miami was definitely a real threat there.
absolutely.
Um, and that day, they definitely thought that they were going to sneak it out at the end.
Yeah,
But that's recruiting, right? It goes back and forth. That's
for
just how
sure.
it is. It's unpredictable. I
Absolutely.
think another one that's interesting here in, recent cycles is David Stone, who
Yeah,
he was going to
definitely.
go to Miami that morning, right? Like
Yep.
everything was good to go. Yeah, I'm locked in. And then things changed that afternoon. I think it might have been, was it his kickoff classic to the senior
Yep.
season, maybe? They played like somewhere in New Jersey. He
Yeah, they're playing
was
on like on the Jersey Shore.
so he was an IMG defensive tackle, and Oklahoma, which is where he's from,
Right.
they were able to kind of get it done in the 11th hour, and you could tell like his people around him,
Right.
they were all dressed in orange and green, and something definitely went, you know,
Yeah.
Oklahoma got it done in the 11th
Definitely.
hour,
Yeah,
and
I
so
think
that was
I
another
think
one.
I think a little sibling hat on. I think they had like had a Miami thing to like celebrate or something. Like it was absolutely Miami until it wasn't. And again, that's the game. That's recruiting, man. And I think both of those, I think Jeremiah Smith maybe more than Stone, but both those were high impact players who could have been, in the same recruiting cycle. I think both of those impacted Miami in different ways, but yeah, I think those are, as far as the times that I've been around, there's been a few. I have quite a few unpublished commitment stories and quite a
Yeah,
few edits that I was never able to kind of
it's part of the game.
post. Even this cycle, like, had the TJ Alford story ready to go. Miami thought that maybe they were going to get him. Maybe this was just me being overly cautious on my end, but definitely had like a DJ Pickett story at the end just in case things changed. But yeah, I think this is it's a common thing to, maybe kind of be right there at the finish line, but you're not always able to cross it. And to me, Jeremiah Smith's the one that will sting
Yeah.
forever if Miami's not able to somehow acquire him down the line sometime.
All right, Mr. Magic asked a six-pack of
Six
questions
pack
here,
of
so
questions.
let's try to just rapid fire this one as quick as we can. First question: what 2 to 3 elite local recruits do you feel like Miami has to get?
Yeah, for me, so I don't know if this is considered super local, but I think it's local enough that I'm just going to do it. To me, one of them is James Johnson, the defensive tackle
Okay.
out of North Fort Myers. Um, Again, not down the road, not in Data Broward, but to me, he's again, I think we got a kind of a glimpse of the North Florida, defensive line scene over the weekend, David, at Under Armour Orlando. Got a chance to see two of the higher ranked guys in the state last week, stopped by to see James Johnson and Kendall Gorville. To me, James Johnson is probably the best interior defensive line body in the Sunshine State. So to me, he's close enough where he counts as local.
Yeah.
So I'm going him. I'm going Calvin Russell, the long receiver on the outside out of Miami Northwestern, a three-sport athlete who's a Miami legacy. His mother is a Women's Basketball Hall of Famer, so a lot at stake there as far as Miami keeping him home. And then Derek Cooper, again, a guy who's I think could be a high-level running back prospect. I think there's some people that like him that think he could be a high-level linebacker. He's got a guy that's gone both ways before, a linebacker, safety, or something. Again, just a big-time athlete. I think those are the types of guys you need to keep home. So those are the three I'd bring to the table.
Second question is what elite national recruit do you feel like Miami has to get?
Yeah, again, I think there's a lot of it just kind of depends what flavor you're looking for. I think there's a lot of great answers here. For me, I'm gonna go Jackson Cantwell. He's the number one offensive tackle prospect, in the country this cycle. Just a physical freak, physical specimen, 6'7.5", 300 pounds. The son of two Olympic throwers. He's also one of like the country's top throwers as far as track and field goes. He's also a high ed kid. When he was on campus in the fall, I heard he had a 39 on his pre ACT or something like that. So or something crazy. Just again, bright kid. ultra talented tackle. I think we saw how Miami getting a guy like Francis Mawanoa, being able to get him ready to get him go when you acquire an elite talent, how he can just be a 3 year steady block for you. I think it's time for Miami to kind of dip back into that well, go get another elite tackle type of prospect who can be a day one contributor and that you don't have to worry about again. Just for a few years. So I think there's going to be a big opening, maybe two big openings at tackle for Miami heading into that 2026 season. And I think Jackson Cantwell is a candidate to potentially be one of those guys. Not saying this is the end all be all, but he's also signed with, for NIL representation, the Rosenhaus Sports, which is a Miami based sports agency that Drew Rosenhaus leads. And I think, again, not saying that's the end all be all, but definitely a lot of just Miami ties within that group. And I think that only helps Miami as far as just being able to continue with their pursuit. So Jackson Cantwell is someone that I'd probably throw high atop that list.
It's a good name. I agree with offensive tackle. They need to land, in my opinion, two top 100 offensive tackles maybe, and I would maybe include like Kenye Pepe there. I don't know if
Absolutely.
he's top 100, but
Yeah,
he's
I
in the
think we
ballpark.
have him like top 40 or at least, right now in
So
this
he's
point
out
in
of
time.
IMG. He's another offensive tackle, and I think you got to keep stacking corners. Like they signed a
Yep.
nice corner class out of high school. They signed a really nice corner class in the portal. I think you got to keep that going, right? You got to stack classes, and so like a guy like Jalen Waters, who
Yep.
recently decommitted from Florida, and I think Miami's going to be in that mix with Will Harris now at Miami. All right, Mr. Magic's third question is Miami set on quarterback in 2026 with Darian Coleman?
I do. I think that's their guy. They went through this process. They evaluated a lot of different guys. I think Darion Coleman brings something a little bit different to the table. Again, has they get Luke Nickel. They got get a winner like that. Darian Coleman's a guy that they had at camp, and 2 years in a row, he led his team to a championship in a 7-on-7 setting. It's not the end all be all, but I think they just love the competitive nature in him. Again, I think when you're projecting his arm talent and things like that, I think that there's a lot to be excited about. And again, that kind of alpha mentality is a trait that they covet, especially at quarterback, as they continue building out the roster around this young group of guys that they're going to continue to recruit at a high level. So I think they feel like they need someone who's going to command the huddle, be able to look guys in the eyes and lead them in big games. And I think Darion Coleman has that trait, and they're excited to get him into the program and develop him for sure.
Fourth question: what move do you think was the most impactful of the offseason?
I think the low hanging fruit would be getting another quarterback. Carson Beck. I think he's
Yep,
a winner in every aspect, in every facet of it. I think 20, what is it, 24-3
I think
as a
so.
starter, 24, 27-3 as a starter at Georgia. And so again, two of those losses we've talked about it, David, are one score losses to Alabama. So I think Carson Beck is absolutely the biggest off-season addition for the Hurricanes. Just going into this 2025 season. Quarterback's the most important position in sports, and Miami needed to get a guy who could do that, could lead this team as they kind of continue. Again, we talk about sustaining success. That 1 year flash in the pan could happen to anybody. It's about sustaining it and building a program. And I think Carson Beck is the perfect guy to kind of help Miami continue to sustain that success. But I also want to point to what Miami did in the secondary. We know that that was the Achilles heel of the program in this during the 2024 season, and they went out and addressed it in a significant way. Not only with the coaches, Will Harris, who has a very, very impressive resume of developing NFL level, defensive backs, cornerbacks, and safeties. Zach Etheridge, a guy who's done a really good job as a recruiter and positioning Auburn to have a very good young core in the secondary with a lot of guys that he recruited. But also what they did from a talent acquisition standpoint between Xavier Lucas, I think the number one cornerback in the transfer portal, and Ethan O'Connor, another high level prospect Miami's really eager about, who has multiple years of eligibility, and Emmanuel Carnley, who was another guy with multiple years of eligibility that did really well. Charles Brantley, a guy who's played on the outside, might be making that transition to nickel, where he probably best projects in the NFL, who's played a ton of football in the Big Ten at Michigan State. And then a Zechariah Poyser, who's a number two safety in the transfer portal. I think what Miami did in the secondary, cannot be overshadowed. But Carson Beck, it's hard to argue that he's not, the most impactful move of the offseason.
I agree with you. I would go with Carson Beck. I also like the idea of Will Harris, Zach Etheridge, defensive back coaches. I think that pairing has a lot of potential. So that group has a chance to be much improved in addition to the personnel difference at defensive back as well. Fifth question. Is there something you wished or wanted to see a move
Right.
Miami make that they didn't?
For me, it's probably the slot receiver. I think that that was a we'll see. Again, I think this isn't to knock what's currently on the roster, right? I think that there's, good young players on the roster, but I think considering how important the slot receiver position has been for Shannon Dawson in his offenses, going back to Tank Dell, right? I mean, 2 incredible years at Houston under Shannon Dawson, Xavier Restrepo, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons under Dawson at Miami. I think the slot is just too important to not have a, solidified, no doubt kind of answer there. And there were opportunities we talked about. FIU's Eric Rivers was one that I think kind of fell on their lap. I think it was very early in the process, and they were, we know now that they were chasing the Eric Singletons, the Zachariah Branches, the KC Concepcions, and I think they kind of let Eric Rivers, a guy like Eric Rivers, who's a really really talented player. Kind of slipped through the cracks a little bit. So I think not addressing the slot and not having something certain there going into spring football is one of those things that I wish that they would have addressed. I think that there are other arguments for sure, but to me, just with how important and how productive the slots have been in these offenses, I don't love that they're going into the spring with a big question mark there.
I agree. And I think too, because it is so important for this offense, you want a potential new slot receiver to have that month of spring football to learn the offense. Because I think you and I both feel like they're probably going to go out and get a slot receiver
Definitely, yeah.
in the spring portal window. And so it just would have been better if they had that slot receiver on the roster here for the month of spring football. All right, number six, his final question of the six pack. Name the breakout offensive kid and defensive kid you all see making noise and having a significant role. Guys like OJ Frederick and Elijah Lofton come to mind from last year.
Yeah, for me on offense, it's JoJo Trader, the wide receiver who will be going into his second year here at Miami. Got his opportunity in the bowl game against Iowa State, and I thought he made the most of it. I think what he flat the way he flashed in that game. What was it, a 40-yard, yak touchdown? He went and earned a lot of those yards. Broke a tackle or forced a missed tackle and got into the end zone. You saw a lot of like the natural swagger that we've seen a ton over the years, just having watched JoJo Trader at the high school level for so long, and I think that he's in position to elevate into a significant role. Again, Jeremiah Smith, his high school teammate, gets a lot of the gets all of the praise and worthy of that, more than worthy of it. But I think JoJo Trader is another one of those Chaminade Madonna guys who I think is on the verge of breaking out 1 year later. So really excited about JoJo Trader. On defense, I'm kind of on the Armando Blunt train. I think that he is someone that, people around the program are extremely excited about. That I think he has a chance to have sort of that breakout potential. A guy that reclassified from the 2025 class to the 2024 class. Before reclassifying, he was the number one defensive lineman in the class of 2025. Spent basically that year, got some reps. He got on the field at times. And I think kind of going into his second spring now, I think that there's a chance for him to really just continue to emerge. He's one of the, I think, most impressive physical defensive linemen, has some inside outside versatility. And I think he can bring a lot. Again, I think he has some breakout potential in year two at Miami. He just turned 18. I think his birthday was like last week, and he just turned 18. So I think he's a really young, promising defensive lineman that I think has a chance to kind of break out.
I agree with you on JoJo. He's who I was going to say on offense. I think if he locks in and really, embraces getting stronger, bigger in the weight program this offseason, I think he can be a better version of, what Jacoby George was in this offense. And he was productive. He was frustrating at times, but he was a productive player. I think JoJo's a better talent than Jacoby. And on defense, maybe this is cheating. So I don't know if this is you know, weaseling out of the answer. But on defense, I'm going to go with Xavier Lucas because he's the cornerback transfer from Wisconsin. He really only played 200 snaps of defense last year. I think he can be a big time NFL level corner when all
Yeah.
is said and done. with his time at Miami, and I think he's a massive addition. I think, you know, his talent and potential, the way that Wisconsin was fighting to keep him and, not allowing him to, trying to not allow him to transfer to Miami, to me tells me how good Xavier Lucas is or can be. So he's the guy I would go with on defense
Yeah,
personally.
for sure.
All right, 305 coach Gabby, you already touched on Armando Blunt, but 305 coach asks, have you heard of any young guys turning heads during the offseason workouts so far?
Absolutely, yeah. I think really the consensus inside the building is that they feel really good about this freshman class. I'll maybe keep it more specifically towards the incoming freshman class that enrolled in January. They got 21 of their, I think, 20 or 21 of their 21 signees enrolled early. So essentially everyone minus Bryce Fitzgerald. And I think there's a lot of positive reviews coming out of what this freshman class is doing. I think two names specifically that I'll bring to the table, both on the defensive side, both defensive ends, Hayden Lowe, the 5-star, and Herbert Scroggins, another top 247 prospect for us at 24/7 Sports. Both those guys, the way that they were described to me is that they're trained assassins, guys that are just kind of have that old school get to work and get after the quarterback type of mentality. And I think both those guys are turning heads early on in their Miami Hurricanes career. But again, there's a lot of guys within that freshman class that I think are impressing. But I think those two specifically are, really making an early impact. And again, it'll be a big spring to see if those guys are actually ready or if they're just kind of, they're kind of just physically and what they're able
Potential.
to do. Yeah, the movement and the potential, if that's just in place, or if this is something that they're going to be able to translate. I think Lowe specifically, he looks like a potential NFL type of player at, 6'4", 250 pounds. He's built like a guy who can play on Sundays down the line. So he's one that I know I'm definitely going to have an eye on, especially in the early portion of the spring as things kind of get going.
Charms 48 asks, what positions for Miami are good enough to compete for a national championship right now?
I think for me, a quarterback, I think Carson Beck
I would
is
agree.
good enough
He's good
to.
enough.
I think
Yeah.
he's good enough to lead Miami to a championship. I think the offensive line, yeah, the starting five, I think is good enough. I think it's going to be one of the best in the country as far as just returning production, and I think that there's a lot of upside there. And as crazy as it sounds, I think the only one that I'd probably feel I don't even know if it's passionate about, but I think the other one that has maybe potential is might be cornerback between
Mm,
OJ Frederique,
I
Xavier
agree.
Lucas, Ethan O'Connor, Emmanuel Carnley, Damari Brown, and plus everything they got returning. It feels like they flipped that room into a room full of, again, potential NFL draft picks. I think that there are multiple potential future NFL draft picks in that cornerback room. They're all young guys. I think that a lot of those guys still have a lot more to prove. But I think a lot of those guys have the upside to play on Sunday. So I think if it all comes together at cornerback, I might lump them into that. I don't know let me know if you push back on this, David, because I kind of tossed around the idea of running back.
I had
Um,
included running back.
yeah, so I wrote down running back, but as I was saying it, I kind of found myself like in a little bit of hesitation because
Yeah.
I feel really good about the top two, right? And I think we'll feel better about the top two as we kind of continue to watch those guys grow and mature.
Well, I
But
think the top two are national championship
yeah,
good. I
yeah,
don't know. I mean, it's projecting Lyle a little bit,
right.
but I think they're both national championship
Yeah,
good.
I agree. I agree. And then again, I think that there's promise just as Gerard Pringle in that running back three role. We'll see what happens with Chris Wheatley Humphrey in year four, but people around seem to feel like there's something there. And look, we saw them, and I'm not saying they're gonna do this, and I'm not saying they have to go get like a Damian Martinez type, but I think this is a position that you kind of evaluate in the spring, kind of see where it's at. And if you wanted to go get another like veteran type of guy, maybe not to lead the room the way Damian Martinez did last year, but a guy to kind of just make it like a true three-man rotation based on what you see from Gerard Pringle and Chris Wheatley Humphrey. Like I think that there's room to improve that room in a way that doesn't take away from Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle and really kind of just elevate the floor. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm excited about the running back room too. I think that might be where I draw the line, David. Is there anyone else? Is there any other position group that you would kind of bring to the table?
Just because it's a position group that I don't know if a lot of programs devote as much resources to it as Miami does, but I feel like tight end. I feel
Yeah.
like Miami's tight end group is talented enough to be there.
Yeah.
There's some questions there in terms of like what's it look like with
Right.
Elijah Lofton, but I think you can use him, and I think he can be a productive national championship level tight end. Is he like a game changer? I think that's to be determined. I think Alex Bauman, he had 7 touchdowns last year
Yeah.
at Tulane, so he brings that red zone ability. I think you could make a case for tight end, but like,
Yeah.
is that a position group that like sways a national championship? No.
Right.
But I think Miami's right there. I think you could say, um, look, I defensive line isn't there, but to me, they're not there because of the depth. I think you could make a case that the starters, if they're
Yeah.
healthy, like if Ruben
Yeah.
Bain's healthy, if Akeem Mesidor's healthy, you go David Blay, Ahmad Moten, and Justin Scott. If he takes a step forward, that's a
Yeah.
nice little five. But
Right.
what's behind them?
Yeah.
And depth matters, right? That's a huge component of success on the defensive line. So they're close. We'll see if those young guys step up. Linebacker to me and wide receiver to me is kind of, I don't
Yeah.
know. I think those position groups are a little far away. I would say, so you said corner specifically. And maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit too much on Poyser, Zechariah Poyser, the safety edition.
Yeah.
But everything you hear about him, rave reviews, like
Right.
it seems like he's going to be able to make a smooth transition from the G5 level to Miami. And if he does, I would just group the whole secondary, frankly. I know there's a question mark still at that second safety spot, but I think Miami could figure that spot out. Maybe if they have to move a corner there, I think they could figure it out.
Right.
But I agree. I think the secondary is good enough. Um, I think Carson Beck, you know, I think he is a national championship level quarterback. Is he going to be as good as Cam Ward? Probably not. But can he lead your team to that level? Yes, especially so if they go out and improve the wide receiver group. I think he's definitely good enough. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's spring's going to be interesting to see who steps up, improves the depth, and if anyone just, like a guy like JoJo Trader can step up and say, "No, I'm going to be a significant contributor to this offense as well." So,
Yeah.
it's going to be an important time for those guys to do what they do. B Griffey 1 asks, "Who or how concerned are you guys about the lack of proven depth in the wide receiver room? Before people attack me for being negative, consider that the top 3 receivers this past year had 800 plus yards the prior season. We don't have to go back. We don't have to go so far back to remember there was multiple years of awful wide receiver production. Right now, the returning production in the receiving room is a combined 800 yards. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair thing to question the group, right?
Absolutely.
Because it really is an unknown. Miami has to replace from last year. They're replacing their top 6 producing pass catchers, which includes Elijah Arroyo, the tight end, also includes Damian Martinez, who was their 6th leading receiver. CJ Daniels, the transfer from LSU, who was previously at Liberty as well. He's a bit of a known commodity, but he's coming back from some sort of offseason procedure on his lower half. So I don't even know how much we're going to see of him in the
Yeah.
spring, to be honest. But he's somewhat of a known commodity, so that's a nice little starting point here as it relates to the 2025 season. But this spring, to me, Gabby, this spring is going to be a vital um, it's going to be vital for them to be honest in their
Right.
self evaluation because I think if we're being critical in a fair way, I think it's fair to say last year I don't think they were honest enough about what they had at defensive back and it
Right.
kind of bit them. I think they were optimistic. I think they were hopeful that guys would take a next step or guys would reach their potential and it just never happened or they just frankly they just weren't good enough, right? Those guys had plenty of opportunities, they couldn't get the job done during the course of the season. I hope Miami is a little more ruthless with their self-evaluations this spring as it relates to wide receiver. And look, just because a guy can't necessarily get it done this spring doesn't mean he can't get it done in the future. So you don't give up on guys because a lot of these guys are young and maybe it's not their time right now, right? So it's a tough balance in a sense because Okay, if a guy's not ready now, he could be ready next year and be a beast, right? So,
Right.
um, but I do hope because look, Miami's success, Carson Beck's success, I think it's going to be related in a significant way as to what weapons he's surrounded with. And I think we hint quite often that Miami's going to go out and get some receivers in the spring transfer portal window. But these young guys have an opportunity to make a case for themselves during the month of spring football, and we'll see who steps up.
I'm right there with you. I feels it feels similar-ish to the way we kind of approached the cornerback room last year because I think we were talking about the corners last year. And we're like, I think that this is an area where they need to kind of, figure some stuff out here. It never really came together, and I think in a different way, I feel the same about wide receiver kind of coming into the spring because I do believe that there are future
Yeah,
difference makers that will be a part of the receiver room this spring. Are they going to be ready in 2025 is the big question. And again, you invest in quarterback and you invest in everything else that you invested in, especially this offseason with the winter transfer portal window. I just think that this is one of those rooms that, again, you can't wiggle your way around this. You can't be going through the spring working or finding avenues to convince yourself that it's okay as is. And if they're guys that you feel like, you feel convicted about, like these guys are it, like these guys are going to help us, like, okay, like, you gotta, but if there's any like true concern, like I think you need to go out and address these issues. And to your point, David, you just said this and we have alluded to this, over the course of time. I do think that this is going to be a spring transfer portal, situation regardless. I think that they are going to address these things. But again, this is a good opportunity for the JoJo traders who, again, I think could earn a role, right? Like I think JoJo Trader could be a potential starter.
I feel good
Um,
about JoJo and I feel good about CJ Daniels.
right.
Outside of
Those two.
him, I just think we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah, and
find
again,
out.
I think we're gonna. I think hopefully we'll see more of CJ Daniels. I think when we kind of saw him in a boot in early January ish as they were moving in, it was relayed to me that again they were optimistic that he was going to be able to be a part of spring football. So we'll see how all of that goes, if whether he is or if he isn't. But again, you got JoJo Trader, but there's a whole the cast around him. Again, the slot. I think that that's a big position that you need to figure out and be honest with yourselves about. And then again, just that depth as you kind of work to navigate a season, just losing so many different pass catchers. And look, I do think at the same time, we talked about the tight end room. I do think a guy like Elijah Arroyo is going to play a significant role in the passing
Elijah
game.
Lofton.
Elijah Lofton, I'm sorry, is going to play a significant role in the
Yes.
passing game. Like I think that there are plans to integrate Elijah Lofton deeply into this offense because again, a young guy we saw him throughout the season in different ways and all the different ways that he's able to be impactful. But as a catcher running downfield, we saw him make a really nice play. We saw him early in his career. We saw him with a long 40-yard touchdown. In the bowl game, he had what would have been a wide open touchdown. But they interfered with him to basically wipe that play off and took the penalty, which was smart for them because but you see a lot of the really, really impressive Elijah Lofton
Athletic.
athleticism that I think that is an underrated part of what to expect maybe with this catching operation. But still, I think that you need to do everything you can to still address more pass catching abilities and just elevating the floor, right? The depth and again, even elevating the upside by getting like a true maybe outside wide receiver one. We feel great about CJ Daniels, but again, if we're being fairly critical, I think he's probably an ideal wide receiver two, right? Um, I think if you can go out and get a true outside wide receiver one, that would be. But again, those guys are also hard to find. I think in general, just finding, continuing to add more pieces at wide receiver, whether it be one or two, whatever that looks like, I think is important to do in the spring.
Outside of CJ and JoJo, what wide receiver intrigues you the most for whatever reason?
Yeah, intrigues me the most. Man, I think I'm pretty intrigued by Josh Moore, just
Okay.
because I think he already is kind of physically built like a college level outside wide receiver. I do think he's raw. I think getting into a college strength and conditioning program, I think unlocks a little bit more of his upside because I think that there's a lot that just you just being in it, day in and day out, I think just gives him an opportunity to just continue to just, work and grow into that big frame. So I think Josh Moore to me is someone like if I was, I think maybe him or Malachi Tony if I was
I
betting
would
on
go
a,
Malachi
yeah,
just
if I
because
was, yeah,
dog mentality. Like
right,
he's, similar in a lot of ways to Xavier Restrepo. Maybe not the fastest, not the biggest, but big time competitor and just figures it out. So, but he is a guy
yeah,
that reclassified. So he's
yeah,
young, might need some time.
yeah,
But I think he can be a future
right,
contributor at slot. I like and
agreed,
Josh Moore too. Like I think in the future they got something in both those guys. So
absolutely agreed.
um, we'll see what the spring brings. Miami fan Dan asks, how much did you enjoy the you getting some love on the Captain America movie? Highly recommend. So, yeah, shout out to Danny Ramirez, who's a friend to both of us. His movie, uh, Captain America: Brave New World. It's gross close to, I think last I looked, Gabby, like close to 300 million
Mm.
worldwide. So having a lot of success. He plays Falcon. He's a big Miami Hurricanes fan. So if you're looking to support a good fun movie and support a Miami Hurricane, go check it out because Danny Ramirez he's good people and big time Miami fan. Reps the program any chance he gets. He's a
I think he
sick.
reps him in the movie, right? Like,
He
isn't he
does.
wearing
He's
like a
wearing a
U, like
UM
a U,
shirt.
yeah,
Yep.
like cutoff shirt?
He's wearing a UM shirt and I was watching, this was like a week ago now, but I was watching the Celebrity All-Star game for the
Yeah,
basketball All-Star weekend. He played in that, and, when they were doing the intros, he did the Cam Ward celebration and threw up the U. So he's a guy that, is all about this. He's a sicko, too, when it comes to, wanting to know about recruiting scoop. So he's in it deep. Bleeds orange and green, and so yeah, go fun, support him, go watch his movie. It's a good
definitely.
time, and it's getting good reviews too. So, congrats to him on that success. All right, Rodney P88 asks, is there a position of emphasis in this recruiting cycle? Last cycle it was defensive back. The cycle before it was landing one of the best defensive line classes in the country. We're now going into year 4 of the Mario Cristobal era. And Gabby, I think this is an interesting question because we're kind of at that point where, what if you include the transition class? This is the 5th class technically, and so that's a lot of time to, build out a roster. And to me, this is kind of the point in time where you just need to continue to land balanced classes because hopefully you've recruited well enough at each position group over those first 5 classes. Do you feel like that's where we're at this class,
Yeah,
or do you feel like there is a specific position group where they're really going to pay attention? I mean, earlier we talked about offensive tackle.
yeah.
Um, Anyways, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that and I think yes, like layering these recruiting classes now, I think is as important as anything else. When you're recruiting the way that Miami's recruiting, I think it's just about stacking talent, and that's not just a general thing that you talk about like, oh, just if you're stacking top end wide receivers every year, but you're not getting any offensive line, you got to stack talent at every single position, and I think that's really the primary goal is just continuing to level and layer this roster where it's at that appropriate depth, where we're talking about whether it's the defensive line or at wide receiver or cornerback or really anywhere, right? It's about having and building depth. And, again, I think
What about
there'll
like
always be,
numbers? Because
right.
like that might be what they're asked. Like, okay, because like DB, I think they were gonna sign like 6 or something. They lost a guy at the end or whatever.
Yeah.
But and then that D line class, a lot of numbers too. Do you
Yeah.
feel like there's a position group with numbers specifically this cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be the defensive line, right? I think what they took two guys who they're
Yeah,
calling interior defensive linemen. I think both of them are developmental type of guys. I think the interior defensive line I think is due for one of those years where it's just they've got some good talent. Again, they've got some guys, the class before, with the Justin Scott. I'm talking about more like Justin Scott types, six
yeah.
foot threes, 6 foot fours who are, pushing 300-pound types of guys. That class was really good with the Cole McConathys and Armando Blunts and Marquise Lightfoot and Elias
How many
Rudolph.
was it? Was it 8? if I
I
remember right.
I think it was, and then you
Yeah,
got I think you got Dalen Russell in there and Artavius Jones. I think you need more of the Justin Scotts and Artavius Jones types of guys. Rather than you know, I just think the
defensive
defensive
ends.
line, yeah,
Yeah,
I think the interior defensive line's big bodies, that eat up space again, especially as you start working through this. If you plan to be a perennial college football playoff contender, as you kind of go through that, I think you need just big body types there. I think, if there's a position of emphasis, of just like need to get like an elite dude, I think maybe wide receiver, I think could maybe be in that argument, as far as just going out and getting like finding a way to land one of these top end pass catchers. I would probably maybe put wide receiver as as a really important position to recruit this cycle. Just because you don't want to keep needing to go back into, we're talking about the spring window and having to go back and get a guy or a slot or anything like that. I think they did a good job the last two cycles of getting good young players that I think again can play in within the next few years. But I think you need to start stacking like a third and a fourth class of just guys that you're like, yeah, this receiver room is layered in a way where this is you got the guy and then you got the next guy kind of lined up, and that's hard to do because everyone's looking like that. And I'm not saying to to be Ohio State and just recruit like 4 or 5 stars or however they do it annually. But I think you need to start getting some of those, a few of those top end guys, to start making the way down here. And especially now that I think there's more of a proof of concept, right? The last 2 years, Miami's
yeah.
receivers have been very, very good and been very, very productive. And I think Miami is known now as a school that is doing really good things offensively. I think now is the time to capitalize on a lot of what Miami's done offensively by attracting one of these high level wide receiver prospects. So that's maybe one. And again, we talked about offensive tackle. I think it's a big cycle for offensive tackle too.
Shirtless Sheriff asks if you could plant a player to this roster from the previous two recruiting cycles, who would you pick? And this has to be a player that Miami, kind of recruited to.
Yeah. On offense, I'm going to take the low hanging fruit, David. So maybe I'll make, I don't know. Jeremiah Smith on offense is the obvious, I think, answer. I mean,
Yep.
there's no other way to really go there, I feel like. For me on defense, I think for me, it's just Dylan Stewart. I think just freak show, pass rusher, future, probably top 5 pick or something like that. Miami was heavily involved in that recruitment. So I think that's probably where I'd go.
Yeah. I mean, Jeremiah Smith is the right answer. I went to, just to be different, I went to defensive linemen and two speed edge rushers because I think, again, if you're being critical about, maybe how this roster projects for next season in a fair way, I think it's fair to like question, is there a good enough speed edge rusher
Right.
right now on the roster? I think Ruben Bain gets it done with power. I think he generates a lot of pressures. But does he has that speed to finish pressures into sacks?
Right.
I think at times, he kind of lets guys slip away. So yeah, Dylan Stewart was a guy I had. He had 51 pressures last year as a true
Crazy.
freshman in the SEC. So that was insane. The other guy, Colin Simmons,
Yeah.
Texas, 46 pressures as a true freshman. He had like 8 pressures against Arizona State in the college football playoff. So, both those guys, Miami was in on him. I mean, that's a really good D line class in
Yeah.
general. And Miami felt like it was at that time, and
Yeah.
they worked it hard.
That's why they went all in. They did go all in that year on trying to
Yeah,
get these guys. And I think both those guys might have visited the same weekend. I think it was like
yeah,
Colin Simmons and Dylan Stewart that were
right.
here at the
With
same
David
time.
Stone too.
David Stone, I think I'm not sure if Aiden Breland was that same weekend too. I have to
Might have been.
I have to take the temperature on Aiden Breland. I haven't seen what
Did
he's
he play?
I'm not sure. I would have to
Yeah.
probably go back and check, but he was just a really impressive, like
Yes.
physical specimen. So yeah, I mean, a lot of impressive stuff. I'm gonna throw a wild card into the mix just on defense.
Okay.
How about Anthony Hill, that linebacker at
Yeah,
Texas?
it's a good player.
His dad, I believe, still has a 305 area code on his phone. So I think his dad maybe grew up in the Keys or down south a little bit. He visited for the spring game. I don't think they got much traction after that.
Yeah.
I think it kind of died a bit after that. I think they tried at the very end where they kind of applied the pressure, but I think that's a true Mike type of
Yep.
linebacker that could just be a huge contributor to a defense like this.
If Dorsett could catch asks, going into spring, what position group is Miami's greatest strength and what position group has you most concerned?
Greatest strength to me, yeah, I think O-line is maybe the most steady, right? I mean, to me,
Yeah,
again, I think you get upside of quarterback is intriguing, but I think just steady, like you know what you're getting there. To me, is the offensive line.
I agree.
Four guys who have started in this offense between Markel Bell at left tackle, you got Matthew McCoy at left guard, Inez Cooper at right guard, and Francis Mauanoa at right tackle. Especially that right side, there's just a ton of experience and production coming back. And then you get a veteran guy like James Brockermeyer who comes over from TCU, who was an all Big 12 honorable mention selection, comes from an NFL, NFL bloodlines. His dad played like 8 years in the NFL, was an All American at Texas. So just love everything about what Miami's done along the offensive line. I think I just concern, it might be linebacker. Just because I feel like that's one of those rooms that they didn't really address in the portal at all, at least in this winter window. And there's some young guys that are coming up that again, I think you just and it's not concerns where I think that this room's bad. I think they're just question marks. For example, I think we might see Wesley the Saint maybe move into a Mike linebacker role. Instead of kind of being more of just like a Sam, off or not Sam, but just like a Will off ball linebacker type. Then you got guys like Raul Aguirre. You got guys like Bobby Pruitt, who's just light, right? Like I think the athleticism through the roof, but just has just needs to kind of put on some weight. You got Jalen Alderman, who's still on the roster as a veteran. I think that there's just a lot of moving pieces, a lot of guys that still have some more to prove at the college level, and I think that's maybe where that's gonna be. I think for me personally, I think that's one of the positions I'm walking into spring thinking like, okay, almost feels like a showcase, right? Like, do we really need to go get a guy here in the spring or, post spring in the spring transfer window, or are we kind of satisfied with what you have? I think that's another room that I think they need to be kind of honest about with themselves about what exactly that looks like.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's either receiver or linebacker in terms of your concern. I would probably give the edge to receiver just because I think it's more important. Like I think it's
Yeah,
a more important position than linebacker. And so I would probably say I think receivers may be in better shape,
yeah,
but
agreed.
I think I think it's more important that they need to really level up that group.
Yeah,
Linebacker, they need guys too. Like I think
yeah,
they need guys, but can you hide linebacker a little bit? Maybe, you know, and especially with I think the secondary is going to be a lot better. I think one of the issues last year was that the secondary being so bad put a lot of pressure on the linebacker group too
yeah,
last year, and so that's where you saw inconsistent play there as well. So, um, yeah, in terms of strength, I agree with you. The other position group I think would be secondary. I think it has honestly been flipped into being one of the
absolutely.
strengths of the team. Um, South Florida Green Child asks, what spots do you expect Miami to try and add in the spring portal? My guess is wide receiver, linebacker, safety, and defensive end.
Yeah, again, I think all those positions are on the table. I think interior defense. I think the spring portal
I think D
has been,
tackle more than
yeah,
D end,
yeah. I
personally.
think
But
I definitely think the spring window has proven to be pretty fruitful with defensive tackles. I think that's
yeah,
I
you got to
think that
pay big for him.
right.
But
You
yeah,
definitely you gotta pay up, but I think that based on what we saw last year, you got Derek Harmon, right? He popped up in the spring window, and he's depends who where you're looking, but like he's definitely getting some first round
the stud.
mock buzz and yeah, freak show. Simeon Barrow, I thought was one of the more impactful defensive players on Miami's roster in 2024. He's a guy that popped up, in that spring window as an interior defensive lineman. I think definitely other places too. I think those were two. I mean, I'm sure there's others that are just not coming up off the top of my head, but I think defensive tackles a premium position. I think that's a place you can
Yeah.
always
And then
stack
we've
talent.
talked about wide
Right.
receiver and
The wide
linebacker.
receivers,
So
exactly, and again, anything else that comes up, right? You can find depth anywhere. And I think like, I mentioned running back earlier, like maybe that's on the table after the spring, depending on how
yeah,
things go. And also, I mean, this is something that's probably gonna, could change based on what you see in the spring. It can change
yep.
based on injury. So I just think the spring window is a good opportunity to again be honest with yourself and reset based on what you kind of see.
EM799 asks, Miami had a successful winter window in the transfer portal. Should we expect Mario and staff to be quote unquote all in for the spring window as well? Any insight into what remaining funds are looking like and whether we should expect some constraint because of how much we spent in the winter window? Yeah, I mean, look, I think they'll be all in again. Look, we kind of always maintain this, right? I mean, I don't think funds are necessarily a problem for Miami at all right now. And in general, I think one way to just understand how things are right now in this moment. Now, will they always be like this? I don't know. But right now in this moment, I think if Mario Cristobal pounds the table for something, he typically gets what he wants. And so if he pounds the table, hey, we need to go out and spend and go add this, this, and this, I think he's going to have the funds to be able to do that. And look, you alluded to the question alludes to how last year the spring window was fruitful for mine. They went out and added Damian Martinez, 1,000-yard rusher, Sam Brown, 500-yard receiver, Tyler Barron, a defensive end who led you in pressures, Simeon Barrow, their best D tackle last season, Jalen Alderman, a solid rotational linebacker. So those were some key pieces to Miami's success last year. And I think they understand that it's important to always be active in any talent acquisition window. And so if there's an intriguing player that hits the portal in the spring and it's a position of need for Miami, I don't think Miami is going to shy away from trying to add that type of player. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean that's not Mario Cristobal's DNA does not point to passing up an opportunity to acquire talent and recruit to the best of his ability. And David, I don't know if this matters. Maybe you could shed some more light on this because I think you know more about it than I think you definitely know more about it than I do. By the spring window, again, you was asking about funds, right? And it's always hard to know exactly like, oh, what's the budget for the spring or anything like that. But how much does the revenue sharing? Because does that not will that not already be kind of
Not
like
till
kicked
at the
in?
soonest the summer.
Oh, it's in the summer. Okay, so I didn't
Yeah.
know if it kicked in the spring or if it was in the summer. So
I don't think it'll even
regardless,
be like ratified or like agreed on until like April.
okay.
So, and
Because I
it
thought
might
about
not
April,
even
and maybe that
happen.
was just the agreement. Right, right.
It might get pushed back or it just might not even happen. So,
Yeah,
now I think it probably will happen, but it's
yeah,
not 100% type of deal.
right.
Um, so yeah, it has that won't enter into the equation yet. And honestly, like that is a reason why potentially this spring window could be insane
Yeah,
because it's kind of your last chance to go take advantage of this wild, wild west type of payday.
yeah.
Because when that legislation goes through, the thinking is, the expectation is that things are going to be a lot more buttoned up in terms of, maybe 2-year deals where you're with
Yeah.
the school,
More
3-year
formal
deals.
contracts instead of
Right.
basically being on 6-month contracts where
Correct.
there's no real nothing that really binds you to a school,
Correct.
right? Long term or really
Correct.
even for a full year. Like it's almost like well, window to window, you're kind of holding your breath. So yeah, no, that's interesting. I hadn't even really thought about it from that perspective of this could be a really crazy spring window because things, might begin to kind of start changing, assuming that this all goes through. So, yeah, that
I don't
again,
think funds are an issue though. I know
yeah,
like
right. I
there's
think
always
that's a
that
general
concern.
point, right? Right.
Um, we kind of said that when, look, the signing day wasn't in terms of the pure rankings of what the class was. I think it was fair to wonder like what's going on here. We kind of maintain like, look, let's see how the winter portal goes. If that's a flop as well, then we'll have some concerns. And I think Miami kind of had a lot of success in the winter window, and it wasn't a cheap winter window, right? Everything that's being reported about Carson Beck, it's all ballpark, right? Like whether or not the straight up numbers are 100% accurate, but it's ballpark, and it shows that Miami definitely has the money. They can spend big and acquire talent. Cristobal 305 asks, Mario's done a good job recruiting in his first 3 cycles, but it hasn't been elite. Schools like Texas had similar success over the last couple decades. So I think they're asking like previous decades to Sark's arrival, and their coach has been around as long as Mario. Sark has out recruited Miami by quite a bit, in my opinion. How do you think our staff and program stack up against the best in the game when it comes to recruiting? Is Mario doing most of the heavy lifting? And if so, do you think we have the staff to step up our high school recruiting game? So I think it's worth mentioning like Sark has been at Texas one more year than Mario, technically. And just his classes and his season records after those classes. So 2021 was his transition class. The season after that, he went 5-7. That's pretty in line with what Mario did, transition class and first season. Then Sark jumps up to number 5 recruiting class in 2022, 8-5 record in 2022. So Miami, I think, if I remember right, Gabby, number 7 class in his first full cycle at Miami, and then 7-5, 7-6 record.
76.
Then Sark jumps up again, number 3 class in 2023. They go 12-2 that year and earn a college football playoff berth. So they level up big time in year 3 of Sark. This year, Mario just missed the playoffs, right? Kind of sputtered at the end. They go 10-3, and the recruiting class, you're right, nowhere close. So recruiting class was what is it? Number 13 now, I think,
Yeah, I think
according to
it's number
24/7
13.
Sports.
Yep.
So outside the top 10, not good, not the standard. And then this cycle, right? Sark number 5 class, 13-3 college football playoff again. So we'll see what year 4 brings for Mario Cristobal. But the trajectories on the field are, you could argue, are similar. I mean, Texas is a higher level. The recruiting, uh, you know, recently is much higher level, but those first few classes were pretty comparable. Um, but I do think it's fair to say, like, Miami is on a similar trajectory as Texas. Texas is on a more steep trajectory than Miami. I think that's fair to say. Um, but I think both programs are similar in terms of potential and expectations. And it was important to have a breakthrough year in year 3. And I think Sark did that in year 3. I think Mario Cristobal did that in year 3. Now, both things can be true. Mario Cristobal had that breakthrough in year 3, and it was still kind of a disappointing year because they didn't maximize the potential, right? Um, Now, on paper, I feel like Miami should, again, build on the success of year 3. I think this year they have to get to the CFP, right? Texas
Yeah.
got to the CFP year 3 and year 4. Miami has to get there this year. I think you look at the ACC, we talk about all the time. You got to handle your business in conference. That's your path to the college football
Right.
playoff. You look at the ACC, Miami and Clemson are clearly the 2 best rosters in the conference. You got to go get it done. Um, so yeah, it's time to deliver. What I want you to address, Gabby, is do you feel like Mario's doing most of the heavy lifting? If the answer is yes, is that a good approach? Is that just the Mario Cristobal approach? What do you think of that approach? Is that just the approach of what recruiting is nowadays, where, yeah, the head coach just has to do the heavy lifting? You also have the NIL element
Right.
and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I definitely think Mario Cristobal is very hands-on, and he definitely cares a ton about recruiting. And I think that that's why he has such a significant presence in the talent acquisition space. And I'm not trying to slight any of the staffers that, a lot of those guys are working really hard to recruit, and they do a good job of building their boards and build great relationships with the guys. And, they do more of their share of helping acquire a lot of talent. But look, I mean, Mario Cristobal, his identity is, and he has said this publicly, like, if you're not recruiting,
Yeah.
basically, like, you don't have a ton of value, like, as far as just like, you need to be willing to put in that work on the recruiting trail. And I do think he's done a good job of putting together a staff. And again, there's been some hits and misses, and I think what he's always done is kind of address those situations. But I do think he cares a lot, and that's why he does a lot of of the work, along with, with the NIL stuff. There's some guys behind the scenes, and they're building out these personnel departments to play, active roles in that department with guys like Dennis Smith, who has been sort of his right-hand man from a
Yeah,
recruiting standpoint over the last 2 years. Dennis Smith has a ton on his plate as far as just what he has to do and his role in helping acquire talent. And he's done a ton of the work too, as far as just you talk about heavy lifting, as far as just
yeah,
putting and
relationships
right,
and
exactly. And with, especially with everything else that the sport has to offer today. So, and then you have guys again in the personnel departments that are helping build this stuff out. So I think the operation is definitely bigger now. And I think Mario Cristobal, considering where we're at, right? I think we have to be, and I don't know,
I
maybe this
like the
is,
structure, honestly.
yeah,
Like, I like that because there's lots of ways to piece it together, right? Mario Cristobal isn't an OC or a DC type of head coach, right? So he's the recruiter. He's going to recruit, and he's going to recruit like a bad man.
yeah,
The OC and DC can work on schemes. Not much is asked of them in recruiting, very much. Is that fair
right,
to say at
yeah.
Miami?
I mean, Dawson just has to worry about quarterback, right? I mean, it's you're
Right.
recruiting one or two guys,
And
tops one or two guys,
they have to check in. They got to be around on,
right?
visits and all that. And then, the position coaches have to handle their rooms essentially. I kind of like that structure because
Yeah,
I
it's almost
think
NFL like, and I think
the
that's just where we're
players are
going,
what matters most,
right?
and these head coaches that are, so involved with scheming one side or the other. I think, there's only so many hours in the day to recruit when you do that.
Yeah.
So
And I think too, and again, this might be a little bit more of a homer take too, but like is all considering who what Mario Cristobal's done, like I also like because we talk about like the dip in the recruiting ranking, right? Despite everything,
compared to the
but
ACC, we talk.
right,
Let's talk
yeah,
about the ACC. They're
yeah. I mean,
lapping the ACC.
yeah, they're lapping the ACC, but again, I feel like definitely lapping the ACC. Absolutely, like there's no doubt. But like, what would be, let's say, if Miami had an SEC or a Big Ten logo? Like, how much does that elevate the ceiling of what Miami's recruiting could be too? Right?
It
Like,
would help.
I think not to say that they're not recruiting well because they're in the ACC. They are recruiting well in the ACC, but I think the threshold, I think it's getting harder to break
I
through to
think
that.
that is one of the biggest negative recruiting things they
Yeah,
get hit with.
yeah. And I
That
feel
they're
like,
not in the SEC or they're not in the Big Ten.
yeah,
Like
and I
that's
feel
what the SEC and the Big Ten sells against Miami.
right. Like if that's something like, and they're still recruiting at a really high level despite
Yeah.
a lot of that.
I mean, look
And
at the
I
rest
if
of the ACC.
yeah, exactly. The rest of the
It's
AC
fallen
gets
off a
way down.
cliff.
It's huge. Yeah, I mean, I think there was maybe one or two other AC schools in the top 25. I think Clemson was outside of the top
So
25.
Clemson was outside. I think it was Georgia Tech and Florida State.
Florida State, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. And then
I mean,
it's just
Florida
everyone.
State not landing top 10 classes tells you what you need to know too.
Right.
Like they should be a program that easily lands top 10
Yeah.
classes.
So yeah, again,
So,
I'm not trying to be like, Miami's in the ACC, but like I do think that since Mario Cristobal's gotten here, it's gotten progressively harder to recruit, and especially as the conferences have realigned, where
well,
Oregon's now in the Big Ten and USC's now in the Big Ten, and the SEC's expanded with Oklahoma and Texas. Like I think that has
NIL's
been
caught up
like
too to
right,
Miami.
yeah,
Miami had a
that's
huge
too,
head start. And look, I don't think this is a bad. Miami's going to adjust and they're going to be fine. But I think this cycle, other schools, other conferences caught up, you
yeah,
know.
I think
So,
that's fair to say.
okay, let's do these pretty quick. Colby Knox asks, each of you pick one guy on offense, one guy on defense that will come out of spring training with significantly more playing time into the year that they didn't already have.
I'll go Jordan Lyle on offense. I'll stick to Armando Blunt on defense.
I'll go Armando Blunt as well on defense. On offense, I'll say JoJo. I mean, that's kind of an easy
Yeah.
answer, but I'll say JoJo. JMOG Burn asks, which first, second year defensive lineman not named Justin Scott makes the biggest impact next season? So you can't say Armando Blunt.
All right, I'm gonna go Hayden Lowe.
I would go Hayden Lowe as well. Coach Marcus 1993 asks, how have the new defensive backs performed in workouts to your knowledge? And who do you see starting going into spring? So, look, I think in terms of workouts, like I think Miami's excited about the collection of defensive
Right.
backs that they have. But workouts are workouts, and
Yeah.
let's see how it looks in the spring. In terms of like starting, just at the start of spring. I'm not saying at
Right.
the end of spring, but at the start of spring, I think OJ Federic has a job
Yeah.
and earned a job. I would say the other corner, even though they're kind of similar like they probably play the same position, but I'll just say at the start of spring, I'll say Ethan O'Connor
Yeah.
probably deserves to start. Charles Brantley is your nickel,
Yeah.
Poiser at safety, and Patterson probably the other safety is what I would do. Now, if you want to tweak some spots, maybe you instead of Ethan O'Connor, you put like a true boundary guy like a Xavier Lucas or
Yeah.
Carnley. Um, but they got a lot of options. I mean, the start of spring to me
Right.
is whatever. I mean, to me, it's interesting. Like, what's it look like after the first week of
Right.
spring, after the
Absolutely.
first scrimmage? So
Yeah, I wouldn't even be surprised if it's like they just threw two returners there. So like
yeah,
again, I wouldn't even be surprised if it was like Damari Brown and OJ Frederic. Again, if it's like first ball rolls out, like this is
right,
like first whistles out at spring, like I wouldn't be surprised if those two guys that are coming back. So like OJ Frederic and Damari Brown, and then everyone
right,
else. And again, it's I think what's gonna be more interesting is like first day after spring break, what does that thing look like?
right. Um, MJC Miami asks, I want the harsh truth. David and Gabby, with similarities to last season with the question at the transfer quarterback. This is in parentheses. We didn't think Ward would do what he did last summer. Uh, as it relates to Beck, he's saying the same is thought of as, with Beck right now. Are you higher on the overall team this year than last year? With the same mindset you had prior to last season, which team looks to be better, this team or last year? So I will say, Gabby, like I think you and I were always very high on Camp Ward
Yeah,
and that he would be a program changer once Miami got him. So
right,
we kind of hinted at that, I think from the jump. Now I think the national perspective of Cam Ward was a little bit more skeptical than we were.
right.
So, fair to ask in that regard, I guess. But like, last year the question about Cam Ward centered around turnovers. I think this year the question with Carson Beck centers around like recovering from the injury, which is a very fair question or concern. Um, I think it's hard to judge a team though until you know what the spring portal window brings
Right.
because last year Miami added so many guys
Yeah.
in the spring portal window. But if we're talking about like going into spring this year versus going into spring last year, and if we are assuming that Carson Beck is going to be healthy, at the start of the season in the fall, I do personally like this roster
Yeah.
better. Now, the offense isn't as good,
Mhm.
uh, but the defense is better, in my opinion. And so I think the overall team is going to be better.
Yeah, I definitely led leaned. I don't know. I was leaning this team as well because I'm going back to spring last year. So Mark Fletcher was hurt, so he didn't participate in spring. There was no Damian Martinez. Elijah Arroyo, there was optimism that he was going to be a really good player. And again, I think we were pounding the table that we thought Elijah Arroyo was going to be a good player, but there was still a lot of unknown there. Um, I think defensively there were a lot of questions too. Remember, there's no Simeon Barrow, no Tyler Barron. I think we
Yeah.
had, real questions about cornerback and safety, just returning, having to,
Yeah.
you have to replace two starting safeties. I don't think any of us at any point felt good about cornerback. OJ
Well,
Frederic
they were
wasn't even on.
boosted by Frederic. I mean, no one
Right,
really saw
right.
like once
No one saw
Frederic
that coming,
once he got into enrolled and
which was in
performed
the
well
summer.
in the summer,
Right.
started getting some buzz, and it was like, yeah, he's obviously good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, yeah, he was good when he arrived. So that was a huge boost. So imagine
Right.
there was no Frederic
Yeah.
boost coming out of the spring. So
So for me, again, just as far as just big picture at this present point compared to last year, again, we felt great about Cam Ward, but I think the team in general, I think we both felt like there's a lot of things that I think I had more questions maybe going into spring last year than I do with this team. And I also think they just
yeah,
did more in the winter, this winter, than they did last winter. So I think
Yeah.
there's just more to be excited about with this team as we walk into spring football.
I did an article here recently last week on Inside the U where I kind of talked about like if you look at the ESPN S&P Plus, which is kind of a ranking that, accounts for pace of play and opponent, so it adjusts for those variances. Miami's defense ranked 60th in the country last year, and the offense was ranked first, right? So that team a huge variance from side to side. I think
Right.
the goal with this team needs to be, okay, can you have a top 25 offense and a top 25 defense? I think that's on the table. Now, that's a huge jump for a defense year over year. I think it's on the table. I think they could sneak into being a top 25 type of defense. I think on offense, if you give Beck another weapon or two at receiver, I think they can absolutely have another top 25 type of offense. And so if this team is a top 25 offense and defense, to me, unquestionably, it's going to be a better team than last year's team overall.
Right.
The offense just isn't going to be as good, unfortunately. But that might have been like, you know, the best offense we'll ever see
Right.
covering the team.
That was an outlier offense.
Yes. All right, we'll get out of here on this one. Uh, X Arcane. Along the line at defensive end, we have some young but very talented guys, also with different body types. He names them, right? Booker Pickett, Marquise Lightfoot, Cole McConaughey, Elias Rudolph, Armando Blunt. Who do you think is the furthest along to contribute?
Yeah, for me, it's I'm sticking with my guy. I'm going with Armando Blunt. I think he's super talented. Again, I think he gives you some position versatility where you can kind of move him around. I think he has definitely a ton of juice off the edge and can get after the quarterback. He's long. I think he's gonna have 2 years of college strength conditioning, and I think that I don't know, man. I think he has super high upside. So I'm rolling with Armando Blunt.
I think he's got the upside element. I would like furthest along, like if you want to look at it through like floor being relatively high.
Right.
I think you could make a case for Cole McConaughey too, just as a
Yeah.
guy that, I do think he's going to give you 200, 250 snaps next season. Um, Whereas to me, Armando, the variance is a little more wider,
Right.
but he certainly has more upside than Cole. Booker Pickett, I like his pass rush potential a lot, just as
Yeah.
a situational pass rusher. Is he going to be ready this year? I don't know, but I like the idea of him.
For sure.
Marquise Lightfoot to me needs to get stronger, bigger still. I don't know. We'll see on that one. And like Elias Rudolph, like his length. Is he ready this year? We'll find out. So, and then we've talked about like Hayden Lowe. I think he's a
Yeah.
guy that could leapfrog a lot of
Yeah.
these guys
Yeah.
too.
A lot of them for sure.
So, uh, also Scroggins, Herbert Scroggins. I think
Yeah.
he's,
Nice group of young defensive linemen, defensive ends,
and that's
just
why
in
you
general.
recruit because the cream
Right.
rises to the top.
That's right.
You figure it out. So, all right, we'll get out of here on that note. Again, we're on YouTube, so go check us out. See our beautiful faces or Gabby's beautiful face
No.
on YouTube at the Inside the U channel. Subscribe over there as well. Give us a little subscription over there. It's free, of course, on YouTube, and we'll keep cranking out these podcasts. Now we'll preview. We'll give a little spring preview here in our next podcast later this week. So appreciate everyone for listening. Go support our sponsors, Kane's Connection and Nick Musarino at the Musarino Law Group. And until next time, take care.